never needed a spotlight. Not when the code spoke louder than any keynote. Not when the logistics ran clean, tight, efficient. That was the kind of applause I trusted systems that held timelines, that didn't slip charts, that flattened instead of spiked. My name rarely made it onto the summary slides, but my fingerprints were everywhere. The pilot I was building had real stakes. If it ran right, we'd scale it nationally by Q3. Smart routing, predictive flagging, vendor synchronization. All my design. I spent more evenings with flow charts than with people. My apartment smelled like dry erase markers and takeout containers I'd stopped bothering to warm up. But I didn't complain. This was the work I believed in. Merritt, our director, had been strangely absent these last few weeks, lots of high-level travel and stepping back to let teams own more. I'd hoped that meant autonomy. But I started noticing odd questions coming from Leora Vance. Leora was the type who walked into a room like it owed her something. She wore her confidence like a custom suit, tailored, deliberate, expensive looking. A senior lead in strategic ops, not on my project, technically, but close enough to hover. She started popping by my desk with casual interest. How are you mapping the vendor redundancy layers? Do you think shipping anomalies are worth isolating at stage 2? Can I grab a peek at your analytics progression? Just curious. It was always just curious. I told myself not to overthink it, that maybe she wanted to learn, maybe she was just chatty. But I wasn't new to this industry or to women who looked like they'd never touched a pivot table, asking for just a quick walkthrough. I didn't say no, but I started answering less. That Friday, I stayed late to rerun model accuracy across 3 warehouse nodes. I was the only one left on the floor, and still I heard her voice echoing down the hallway, laughing with someone from senior ops like she'd been building it all with me from day one. By the time I shut my laptop, the weight in my chest felt less like tiredness and more like warning. It started as a flicker, a phrase that didn't belong in Leora's mouth. We were in the Monday stand-up, low-stakes, early coffee, the usual shuffle of updates. Leora leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, her voice calm and clean. We've adjusted the redundancy layers to better insulate Phase 2 failure points, she said. I blinked. The sentence wasn't general. It was surgical language I'd used word for word in a memo I hadn't circulated. A phrasing I drafted late on a Sunday, tweaking between analytics exports. But there it was said like it had always belonged to her. No one else reacted. A few quiet nods. Someone scribbled a note. The moment passed, absorbed into the room like it hadn't happened. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe I'd said it aloud once. Maybe she skimmed something I left open in a shared drive. Maybe it was just proximity. But the doubt didn't last. Later that week, I was walking back from the printer when I heard her voice carry down the hallway from the break room. I wasn't trying to listen, I just stopped. The projections finally stabilized after I adjusted the redundancy layers, she said, especially once we restructured the trigger flags under the vendor tree. Q1 was rough, but I think we're in a good rhythm now. I stood there one step outside the doorway, paper in one hand, coffee in the other, watching the hallway like it might shift the moment back into place. Her tone was relaxed, almost bored, like she'd lived the chaos, like she knew what it meant to chase variables through a maze of bad data at midnight. The silence after her words was worse than the lie itself. It was the kind that told me someone was impressed. I heard Merritt reply, quiet, engaged. He asked about delta thresholds, and she answered without hesitation. Not approximations, not guesses. My logic, my phrasing. Spoken like a script. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even let myself breathe too deeply. I turned around, walked back to my desk, and sat down. The report on my screen hadn't changed. But I had, and for the first time I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being rewritten. I didn't sleep that night. Not from anger. Anger at least has a pulse. What I felt was emptier than that. Absence. A slow fading. I opened the pilot folder and clicked through each file one after another. Not to revise anything, not to double-check formulas. Just to see. To remind myself of what I had built. Line by line, graph by graph, logic chain by logic chain. They were all mine, every piece of it. And yet as I stared at the screen, I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's structure. I remembered the weekend I wrote the vendor logic February with snow hammering the windows and my space heater barely doing its job. I remembered the Sunday I skipped my niece's birthday to rewire failure triggers after a data collapse. I remembered sitting in the same chair, same clothes for 21 straight hours, chasing down why the optimization delta refused to converge. Now those models lived in her mouth like stage lines, glossed over, weightless. I didn't cry. I didn't vent. I didn't write angry drafts of messages I'd never send. I just kept scrolling, kept clicking. Until 3:17 a.m., somewhere between slide 42 and the final CSV, a clarity settled in. Not blazing, not righteous, just cold and precise. By sunrise, I knew what I would do. I opened the shared folder, the one she would pull from when it was her time to present to leadership. The file was sitting there clean and complete. She believed that was the version I'd finished, the one that would walk the room through every milestone. She hadn't asked to review it. She hadn't circled back. She just assumed. I moved it to a private encrypted folder. Then I built something new, a hollow replica. The same slide structure, same titles, but stripped of substance. No projections, no graphs, no embedded logic, just placeholders, text boxes with nothing in them. At the very end, I added one final slide. Centered, bold good luck. Not sabotage, not a lie, just space. She could stand in front of the room and say whatever she wanted, but this time it would all be hers, including the silence. The boardroom shimmered with that curated tension only senior execs can summon: pressed suits, crossed legs, folded hands over leather-bound notebooks. I took my seat near the far end, not too close, not too hidden, just enough to see everything without being seen. Leora entered like a headliner, late to her own show. Heels sharp on tile blazer pressed to unnatural perfection, that practiced smile painted across her face. She gave a few casual nods, offered a polished good morning, and took her place at the front. She lifted the remote, clicked. Nothing, click. Still nothing. The projector screen pulsed a neutral gray, unbothered by her authority. A few chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Leora let out a small, bright laugh. Tiny tech hiccup, she said, waving it off. I'll just walk us through while we get it sorted. And then she began. At first it was smooth, too smooth. Buzzwords lined up like soldiers marching one after the other. She was performing confidence, but there was no muscle behind it. Her rhythm was wrong. Her phrasing sounded hollow, like she was quoting someone else's script, because she was. She moved into the flow segmentation outlining phase, breakdowns I'd built from scratch. She reversed 2 milestones, called the same trigger by 2 different names. Nobody stopped her, but the temperature shifted, barely perceptible, but real. Then came the vendor mapping. She tried to list integration protocols, but stumbled. Her tone faltered. Eyes scanned for support that never came. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I watched. Behind her, the projector remained empty, gray, waiting. By the time she reached the optimization model, her voice had a tremor she couldn't hide. She guessed at a projected decrease. 26%, she said, voice rising like a question. Maybe slightly higher, depending on variables. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was evaluative. Someone tapped a pen. Another leaned back, arms crossed. She swallowed hard and turned to the laptop. Still smiling, still selling, but now I could see the edges start to fray. Do you have the projection slide? The voice came from the far end of the table, an analyst I didn't recognize, polite but pointed. Leora's smile held for half a beat too long before she blinked and turned to her laptop. Yes, of course. Just a small upload glitch earlier, she murmured, her fingers already moving. The file opened. Her breath caught. I watched the moment land, clean and exact. The placeholders floated like ghosts. No charts, no models, just fractured text boxes. And at the bottom, a final slide in bold, unblinking font. Good luck. The pause that followed wasn't confusion. It was revelation. Leora's face cracked, not dramatically, just enough for anyone paying attention. Her eyes didn't dart for help this time. They locked on mine, desperate, accusing, lost. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I held her gaze even as the room turned colder. No one rushed to fill the space. Even Merritt, who usually stepped in to smooth awkward pauses, said nothing. Someone uncapped a pen and tapped it once against their pad. It was a sound louder than her entire presentation. She tried to speak just one word, but it snagged in her throat and vanished. That's when he said it, Merritt, his voice low and level. Corally, he said, turning slightly toward me, "You were involved in this project, weren't you?" I let the question hang, not out of hesitation, but precision. "Yes," I said. "I was." He gave a small nod, not surprise, but confirmation. "Do you happen to have the full version?" I reached into my bag. My movements were slow, deliberate. I pulled out the USB, stood, and crossed the room without ceremony. No one said a word. The projector blinked once, then bloomed to life with the first clean slide. My slide, my work. I turned to face the room. The words were already forming, not rehearsed, not memorized, just mine. And so I began. The slide clicked forward without hesitation. No delay, no glitch, no placeholders. Just the title centered clean, exactly how I'd structured it 2 weeks earlier at 2 a.m. With cold coffee and a cluttered screen, AI-driven logistics optimization. Pilot Phase 1 overview. I took a breath. Not to steady myself, I wasn't nervous. I just wanted the room to be fully present. And then I spoke. This pilot initiative was designed to assess fulfillment, accuracy, and vendor synchronization across 3 regional nodes. I said voice measured. We began by isolating failure points in Stage 2 workflows and retraining the predictive flags based on real-time inventory drift. I didn't need to gesture. I didn't need to look around. The work carried its own gravity. The math, the logic, the unglamorous iterations, they stood in front of me like scaffolding. Slide 2, vendor flagging schematic. Slide 3, predictive failure charts. Slide 4, optimized response timelines. Each transition landed with precision. These weren't just visuals. They were built from the hours I didn't log, from the nights I didn't count. They weren't decoration. They were declaration. I could feel the energy shift. The silence changed. It wasn't the kind that follows confusion. It was the kind that follows attention. People leaned in. A pen tapped in rhythm with a note being taken. Someone whispered something quickly and nodded. Merritt didn't interrupt. He didn't smile either, but his posture had changed. A small tilt forward, watching not out of obligation but interest. I moved forward. By decoupling the vendor response logic from the outbound fulfillment layer, I said we reduced average lag time by 22.6%. Further iterations brought that to 37%. Slide 5 loaded bar graphs, blue and gray layered over structured benchmarks. No gradients, no flash, just clarity. Only when I reached slide 6 did I glance around the room. Leora hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, but smaller somehow. Her hands were locked together in her lap. Her posture was hunched, and her eyes weren't on the screen. They were fixed on me. I didn't give her anything back. No nod. No look. I turned to slide 7 and let the work do what it was always built to do, stand on its own. The break room smelled like burned coffee and something microwaved too long. I was refilling my mug second pour same grounds when I felt her behind me. You didn't have to do that. Leora's voice was sharper than usual, not loud, just edged. I didn't turn. I stirred the coffee, watching the swirl dissolve into brown. You could have come to me first, she added, more brittle now. I turned slowly. She stood there, arms crossed, like a shield, jaw tight. Her blazer was still perfect, but the confidence had cracked. Her tone held the remains of someone looking for a version of events where she was misunderstood. I would have fixed it, she said, not meeting my eyes. I met hers. You didn't just take credit, I said. You tried to erase me. Her mouth opened, closed. No rebuttal came. Silence stretched between us. Not angry, not charged, just plain. Final. I stepped past her, coffee in hand. She didn't move. Back at my desk, the room was different, subtle, but shifted. Conversations happened without glancing her way. The junior analyst who used to loop her in on everything now stood 2 rows down chatting with Davy from infrastructure. Her desk, once a magnet, had become an island. By the end of the week, she wasn't in strategy calls anymore. She wasn't CC'd on vendor threads. And when Merritt handed out assignments Friday afternoon, hers was a data validation audit with no deliverable timeline. She didn't object. She just nodded eyes on the floor. The following Monday, she walked in 10 minutes late to stand up. Her hair was pulled back, but not with its usual precision. Her blouse was creased at the shoulder. I don't think anyone noticed but me. She didn't speak unless addressed, didn't volunteer input. When she passed through a hallway, voices dipped just slightly. Not hostile, just uninterested. The spotlight hadn't turned. It had gone out. And she was standing in the dark. By the following Monday, the version of Leora that once lit up the hallway didn't show up. The person who did arrive was quiet, slightly disheveled, and walked with her shoulders too close to her ears. She didn't make eye contact. Her blazer had a wrinkle near the hem that she hadn't caught. Her desk, once surrounded by soft laughter and impromptu syncs, sat in a cone of silence. No junior analysts circling with quick questions. No calendar pings lighting up her screen. The pilot files had been transferred. She didn't fight it. That morning, she was assigned to a legacy data cleaning task, something 2 pay grades beneath her, the kind of project that gets shuffled until someone leaves. She nodded once when Merritt explained it. No argument, no excuses. Throughout the week, she worked in a low hum of quiet detachment. She took notes on paper now, not her tablet. She kept to herself. When meetings wrapped, she was the first to leave and the last to be addressed. Her voice, once a fixture in brainstorms, barely surfaced. No one was cruel, but no one reached either. And that was louder. Then on Friday, just past 6, the email came. Tucked between auto notifications and end-of-week summaries. Subject: transition, body effective. Immediately, I will be stepping back from my current role to pursue new opportunities. Please direct all logistics-related inquiries to Corrali Knox. No goodbye, no reflection, just a quiet severance. By Monday, her desk had already been half cleared. The chipped ceramic mug was gone. So was the framed quote that used to sit beside her mousepad. Her chair was tucked in too neatly, the desktop wiped spotless. No one mentioned her in the team sync. Merritt didn't say we wish her well. There was no farewell lunch, just an edit. As though the room had rewritten itself and her name had been silently deleted. I opened my laptop. My calendar invites were already stacking project review, vendor call, rollout prep. The chair beside mine stayed empty. No one sat there now. It was 3 days later when I found it. A note, small, torn from a yellow legal pad left leaning against my monitor. No envelope, no signature. Just 2 words in rushed, uneven pen strokes. I'm sorry. No one else said anything. No quiet nod from a coworker who'd seen her drop it off. No HR notification, no subject line. Just that scrap of paper like an afterthought or a confession whispered too late. I didn't pick it up right away. I just looked at it the way you'd study a photograph of someone you no longer recognize. It wasn't an apology for the room. It wasn't for show. It was quiet. Like her exit, like the unraveling. I read it once, then again. Not because I needed to understand it, but because I needed to feel its weight. It wasn't for closure, it wasn't for forgiveness. It was evidence. She hadn't said sorry the day she claimed my work. She hadn't flinched when the slides failed or when the silence swallowed her name. She hadn't folded when the team shifted around her like she no longer existed. But now, with everything stripped back, no desk, no title, no eyes left to impress. She'd written something, not a defense, not a plea, just 2 words. It was enough. I folded the note once, then again, tucked it under a stack of quarterly reports in the bottom drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it close, not out of sentiment, just to remind myself that some stories collapse under their own weight. She tried to rewrite mine, tried to stand on pages she didn't author. But eventually, the silence did what it always does. It surfaced the truth. That note wasn't a gesture of regret. It was proof of gravity, that when the noise faded and the lights dimmed, what's left behind tells the real story. By Friday, my inbox held a request for the national rollout plan. A separate thread confirmed a Seattle integration call. They weren't asking if I was available. They were assuming I'd lead it. 2 months later, I stood in the same boardroom, but everything was different. The seats were filled again, but this time with directors flown in from 3 regions. Procurement leads, strategic ops, partners from our West Coast vendor alliance. Merritt sat near the window, flipping through a printed version of my deck. There was no murmur of doubt, no waiting to be impressed. They were already listening. Before I'd said a word, I clicked the remote. The screen lit up clean-aligned reel. Slide 1, National Rollout Framework. Slide 2, Efficiency Gains in gold. Slide 3, Timeline Projections tight as clockwork. We reduced fulfillment errors by 37% in the pilot. I began my voice steady. Today I'll walk you through how we scale that across 12 regions with even greater impact. I wasn't performing. I wasn't reclaiming. I was building. Each section unfolded the way it had been designed to, shaped in long nights, early drafts, the architecture of failure and refinement. The questions they used to pepper me with after every slide gone, replaced by nods, by notes, by plans. No one was watching the screen by slide 4. They were watching me. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. My pace had changed. I wasn't speaking to prove I belonged. I was outlining what came next. Even Merritt smiled just slightly when I broke down the vendor reallocation model. I saw it in his eyes, not surprise, recognition. I reached the final slide. Integration by Q3. Optimization before Q4. No one picked up their phones. No one shifted in their chairs. I let the numbers hang in the air a moment longer before clicking the remote once more. The screen faded to black. Back at my desk, the sunlight leaned across the carpet. My inbox pulsed, invites, requests, internal threads I once watched from a distance, now flagged for my input. I answered one, marked another for later. Then I opened my bottom drawer and unfolded the worn note. The paper was softer now, edges curled. 2 words fading. I folded it back, tucked it beneath a fresh stack of forecasts, and reached for my laptop. There was still more to write.